Good afternoon, everybody. Looks like we still have some attendees joining, which is great. But I think I know we have a lot of material to cover today, so I think we'll go ahead and just get started with some of the logistics and the housekeeping for this meeting. So let me just start off first by welcoming everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Ian Macmillan, and I am an Assistant Deputy Executive Officer with the South Coast Air Quality Management District, South Coast AQMD. We're here today to talk about our 2022 Air Quality Management Plan. We're having a regional public hearing today. So welcome all to this meeting. Thank you very much for participating. I'm going to go ahead and read through a little script we have on the housekeeping and logistics for the Zoom meeting. We're going to do our best to facilitate a smooth meeting with public participation. We have two formats for participation, the Zoom web application, as well as teleconference. Before we begin, I want to review some guidelines and general instructions for the meeting. For those on the panel, we ask you to please silence your other communication devices, such as your cell or desk phone. This will ensure that we're not hearing any feedback or causing interruption during the meeting. All participants on Zoom, except for panelists, will be placed on mute by the host. You will not be able to mute or unmute your line manually. After each agenda item, I will announce public comment. Speakers may be limited to a total of 3 minutes or less for public comment. We may provide a shorter length of time depending on the number of requests to speak received to allow everyone an opportunity to be heard. A countdown timer will be displayed on the screen for each public comment. And let me move to the next section here. For those on Zoom, if you would like to make public comment, please click on the raise hand button. For those calling in by phone, you can dial *9 to signal you would like to comment. Your name or part of your phone number will be called when it is your turn to comment, and the host will unmute your line automatically. Please note you can hang up and/or leave the Zoom meeting at any time. Please adhere to the speaker time limit and treat others with courtesy, civility, and respect. Failure to do so can result in your mic being muted or you being dropped from the meeting. Lastly, please be aware that this video conference meeting is being recorded. By participating in this meeting hosted by South Coast AQMD, you agree to authorize recording of audio and visual content presented during the live event and consent to subsequent use of the recording in the public domain by South Coast AQMD. Finally, if there are any South Coast AQMD board members or their consultants who wish to be brought onto the panel, please raise your hands and we can bring you over. With that, we'll go ahead and get on to the run of our program here today. We have a lot of material we'd like to go through. There's a whole series of presentations we'll be providing on the AQMP itself, the state plan, the state strategy that is incorporated as part of the AQMP. We'll go through our environmental analysis for the measures, proposed measures, as well as our socioeconomic impact assessment. So a lot of material to get through. We will be taking public comment at the end. That is actually one of the main things, it is one of the main things that we really are here for. We want to hear from folks, hear from all stakeholders, the diverse perspectives that are out there. But because we have a lot of material to get through, we do want to get through that first, and then we'll take public comment at the end. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Each speaker will go ahead and introduce themselves as they are going or just starting off on the presentation. So I'm first going to turn it over now to Dr. Sang-Mi Lee to give an overview of the revised Draft 22 Air Quality Management Plan. So go ahead, Sang-Mi.
Thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Sang-Mi Lee, Planning and Rules Manager working on Air Quality Management Plan. So my presentation is going to provide a brief overview of the 2022 AQMP. With that, please, next slide. Next slide. So, previous one, please, one before. So this is, as Ian mentioned, it's a regional public hearings for the 2022 AQMP. We have all 5 plans scheduled as shown in this slide, and today's meeting is 4th of the series. And then we'll have one more tomorrow at 1 p.m. Even though that is listed for Riverside County, the content will be the same, and then all public's comments are more than welcome. Next slide. So brief outline of my presentation is I will start with the background of ozone air quality in the South Coast Air Basin and the NOx emission levels that are expected to be in current year and the future years, and the South Coast AQMD's control strategy to attain the ozone national standard. And the carbs control strategy will be presented by Sylvia van der Speck as the presentation following mine. And then the overview of public process involved in the development of AQMP. Next slide. So we start to who we are with South Coast Air Quality Management District is local air pollution control strategy. We oversee air quality in South Coast Air Basin and Coachella Valley, and we are the largest of the 35 local air agencies in the United States. Our primary responsibility is reducing emissions from stationary sources. Also, we are responsible to develop a plan such as AQMP to meet the federal air quality standard. Next slide. So this is a specific presentation is about 2022 AQMP. AQMP is in general a blueprint to improve air quality and meet the federal air quality standard in South Coast Air Basin, Coachella Valley. So this specific AQMP is to address the 70 ppb, the latest EPA's A-double-ozone standard. The EPA revised the ozone ambient air quality standard in 2015 and it make it more stringent by lowering the level to 70 ppb. And this plan is addressing strategy how to meet the 70 ppb standard. Next slide. So the photos here in this slide explain our challenges we faced in South Coast Air Basin. First of all, it is out of question that we have made great strides over the past half of a century, as shown in these two photos. However, South Coast Air Basin still has the worst ozone air quality in the entire nation, and we are among the worst in fine particulate matter pollution. So still there is a long way to go to improve air quality to the level defined in EPA's federal air quality standard. Next slide. So this line graph presenting sort of quantitative progress we have made in the past 3 decades or so. The blue line is the South Coast Air Basin's ozone level, and red line is Coachella Valley's ozone level. It is obvious that we have made good progress. However, still we are well above federal air quality standard. There are 3 different A-double-ozone standards as depicted here with black broken line. The lowest one is the latest one that this current AQMP is addressing. Next slide. There are adverse health effects associated with ozone. Ozone is known to irritate respiratory tract, so it can increase coughing, sore throat, or increase susceptibility to infections. It aggravates emphysema, chronic bronchitis. It enhances the frequency of asthma attacks. But also the pollutants that form ozone can form fine particulate matters, and PM2.5 is known to cause premature death. Next slide. Then the question is how to improve ozone air quality. And our current analysis indicate the emission reductions or reduction of NOx emission is a key approach to improve ozone air quality in the South Coast Air Basin. So nitrogen oxide or NOx is the pollutant that is emitted from combustion process or combustion of fossil fuels. And the bar graph on the right depicts the NOx emissions estimated to be for the base year, which is 2018, and the future milestone year or future attainment year, which is 2037. So under business as usual condition, NOx emissions are expected to decrease. That is due to ongoing implementation of adopted regulations. As shown in this graph, the second bar chart, orange bar chart indicated future business as usual condition expected to have roughly half of current day's NOx emission level. However, that business as usual condition is not sufficient to meet the latest EPA's ozone standard, which is 70 ppb. So this 2022 AQMP indicate the most amount of NOx emissions we can accommodate in the air while still meeting the standard is only 60 tons per day of NOx. That is 83% reductions from current day level and 67% additional reductions from future business as usual condition. Next slide. So the question is, then where does NOx emissions come from? So this pie chart depicts the source of NOx emissions in stationary source in blue and the mobile sources on-road in green and off-road in yellow color. Left pie chart is current day condition, and then right one is future attainment due date condition. What you can see is one, the majority of NOx emissions in the South Coast Basin coming from mobile sources. Therefore, the emission reductions, not only stationary sources, but mobile sources are important. Second one is this yellow portion marked as off-road mobile presence increases in the future year. So that puts us, that brings awareness. What does off-road mobile source category consist of? Next slide. And here, kind of a little bit delving into the responsibility, who has the authority to reduce emissions from certain sectors? So the previous slide, we've seen the off-road category increases its presence in the future year. This off-road mobile source category includes the categories such as ships, aircrafts, locomotives, and certain type of construction industrial equipment, or even lawn and garden equipment, so all belong to off-road category. However, the majority of this off-road mobile source categories belong to federal government's authority to regulate for. So this bar chart on the left depicts that the total emissions that under federal authority or federal government is more than the 60 tons per day of NOx level, the most amount of NOx emissions we can accommodate while meeting the 70 ppb standard. So this bar chart also indicates the emissions that subject to state, local and state agencies, approximately 2/3, and then 1/3 of total emission belongs to federal authority, indicating that federal government's action to reduce their shares of emission reduction is critical to meet this federal ozone air quality standard. Next slide. This bar chart illustrates where the emission reduction is coming from to meet the 60 tons per day level. So South Coast AQMD's control measure targeting 32 tons of emission reductions as illustrated here. CARB's state SIP strategy, which the Sylvia is going to present after mine, will address the CARB's reductions from the sources directly under CARB's authority, and also reductions from the sources that kind of subject to federal authority as well. And with all this strategy, we expect to reach the 60-ton level, or in other words, attainment level. Next slide. This amount of reductions required to meet the standard is beyond the level of reductions that can be achieved through traditional approaches. Therefore, innovative approaches and advanced technology is necessary. Here, this traditional approach, meaning that the way that the traditionally air pollution district was pursuing emission reductions, those are through emission reductions through tailpipes or exhaust stacks by employing cleaner control technologies or newer engines or utilizing cleaner fuels. However, there is a limit on these approaches. So this AQMP is addressing the strategy that requires a society-wide transition to zero emission wherever feasible, and also employing advanced technology. Next one. So this is listing out South Coast AQMD's control strategy. That, of course, we have a control strategy pursuing NOx reductions directly from NOx control measures. We are also pursuing core benefits of NOx reductions from greenhouse gas reduction policies. And then we also have limited VOC measures and other measures. Next slide. This illustrates South Coast AQMD's NOx control measures targeted for stationary and aerial sources. We group them into three categories. That first one, residential combustion, second, commercial combustion, and the last one, industrial combustion. Industrial combustion is maybe most typical category that traditionally air pollution control has been focused on. That is pursuing NOx reductions or emission reductions from boilers, process heaters, refineries, electricity generating units. But then this AQMP also called for emission reductions from residential and commercial categories. There are definitely combustion sources in these buildings. Those utilized in water heating, space heating, and other combustion applications. And we need emission reductions from all combustion sources. Next one. While South Coast AQMD has limited authority on the mobile sources, we still laid out our innovative approaches to pursue emission reductions from mobile source categories. The first one is facility-based mobile source measures. Some of these are commonly referred as indirect source rules. These measures are targeting emission reductions from facilities such as airports, marine ports, rail yards, and warehouses. Additionally, we are also looking for ways to reduce emissions from limiting emission growth by, for example, deploying clean construction policies and then working with the new and development projects. We are also looking for emission reductions through incentive programs by accelerating turnover to cleaner engines and the equipment. Also, we have a partnership with international national agencies to accelerate turning over to cleaner engines and mobile sources as well. Next slide. So public engagement and then public's feedback are critical in developing AQMP. And then here illustrate the different venues that the AQMP development process has hosted to solicit public engagement feedback. That includes advisory group meetings, working group meetings, control measure workshops, and public workshops. And this is what we are doing. Public hearings is part of it as well. And then we also coordinate with our the sister agencies and other federal agencies as well. Next slide. Also, this illustrates where we are at with AQMP development. We released a draft AQMP in early May. We had almost 2-month window that public can submit written comments, and all the comments has been addressed. And based on the public comments, AQMP has been revised, and then we released the so-called revised draft AQMP. That was early last month. And then we have received the comments on revised draft AQMP as well. And then the other two components is CEQA, draft program EIR, and socioeconomic impact analysis. And these two will be discussed more in detail in the presentation following mine. Next one. This summarizes the public comments received on draft AQMP. There are in total 80 comment letters, but then this is just summarized in the large categories. The first one is there were concerns and questions regarding general approach for the AQMP, why we are doing, what's the consequences of not doing it, etc. And then also there was concerns and questions about the need for federal action, how to engage them to do their actions to reduce emissions. And then there were concerns why we are doing black box measures in this AQMP. Next one. Also, the public comments were regarding a zero emission technology proposed in residential and commercial buildings and the cost associated with those measures. And then whether we have solid enough infrastructure to support such a zero emission technology. And lastly, there were concerns of how to address equity in this transition to zero emission and cleaner the future. Next slide. We also include the health effect analysis. The health effect associated PM and ozone is part of AQMP package as well. Specifically, this is included in Appendix 1. And so far, we formed advisory council to review this health effect study, and 2 meetings has been performed. And currently, this health effect is under revision to address council's comment. Next slide. We also developed the policy briefing papers to assess the development AQMP. As shown on this slide, there are 5 different ones, and all of them are available on AQMP website, of which website address is given in this slide. Next one. So in all the AQMP related documents, supporting documents, comments from the public, draft version, revised version, all of them have concatenated depository, which is the AQMP website. That address is given here. So the publics and stakeholders encouraged to take a look. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out to the staff. Next slide. And this is how you can reach out to the staff through internet submission form, email, the mail, and then telephone. Next one. And the steps that we expect from here is we are going to revise the AQMP once more to reflect the public comments, and the South Coast AQMD's governing board is going to consider the adoption of the AQMP on December 2nd. CARB will conduct their own public hearings in early next year, followed by submission to EPA. This concludes my presentation today. Thanks for your attention.
Great. Thank you so much, Sang-Mi. I know there's a lot of really important information that you covered there. We're trying to cover it at a high level because we do have a lot to talk about today. We definitely encourage everyone to go take a look at the AQMP itself. If you're just interested in certain chapters, certain sections, go to those definitely, but there's a lot of really good information there. So really do appreciate that. One of the other pieces that Sang-Mi referenced that is really critical to this is the various state efforts that are underway. And so we are very happy to have Sylvia Vanderspeck here from CARB to talk about the recently approved state SIP strategy. So Sylvia, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Okay, thank you, Ian. Again, my name is Sylvia Vanderspeck, and I'm Chief of the Air Quality Planning Branch at the California Air Resources Board. And today I plan to provide you the details regarding CARB's measure and emission reduction commitments in the 2022 AQMP. Next slide, please. So before I focus on the South Coast, I just want to highlight the challenge across the state of California with the 70 parts per billion ozone standard. In California, there are 19 non-attainment areas. 10 of them are classified as moderate and above and must submit a SIP. And then, we also include now, the only extreme areas of the country, the San Joaquin Valley, the South Coast, and the Coachella Valley. 7 of these areas need emission reductions in order to meet the standard on a timely manner. And so that's part of the emphasis for doing the statewide strategy. Next slide, please. So last month, the CARB board approved the state measure commitments in the 2022 state SIP strategy. The strategy was developed through a robust public process, and it identifies the level of action needed to meet air quality standards and protect public health across the state. This strategy is going to be driving the pace and scale of CARB's rulemakings over the next decade. And specifically for the South Coast, the strategies identifies the actions the federal government needs to take to reduce emissions under their control, as highlighted by Sang-Mi earlier. Next slide, please. So the figure here identifies a list of measures that CARB will pursue. Some of these have already been adopted by the CARB board, such as the Clean Mile Standard regulation, which targets fleets like Uber and Lyft. Many are in the middle of their regulatory process. There are 2 regulations targeting heavy-duty trucks, the Advanced Clean Fleets, which the CARB board will hear this month, and the Zero Emission Truck Measure. New motorcycle standards are also being developed, and CARB will be pursuing a suite of off-road measures, including new off-road standards, zero emission requirements, and regulating sources that operate at the ports. CARB's in-use locomotive regulation is innovative and will provide significant reductions in the South Coast. CARB is also ratcheting down on consumer products, and in conjunction with the South Coast District, we are developing a zero emission standards for space and water heaters. Next slide. And please click through all there. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, the board approved the list of measures. Well, what the board also did was approve the schedule that these measures had to be adopted and implemented by. So the stars on this chart show the required adoption date for these measures, and the blue boxes, the dark blue boxes, show when these regulations are going to be implemented. And so as you can see that there's these measures will be considered by CARB for the next 5 or 6 years, and they will provide significant emission reductions in the South Coast. Next slide. You know, as Sang-Mi highlighted, that really to meet the standard in the South Coast, the federal government needs to do their part. EPA, you know, while EPA is in the process right now developing a low NOx standard, CARB does think that there is opportunities for a zero emission engine standard sometime in the future. For off-road, we think it's appropriate for them to develop a tier 5 standard and requiring zero emission where feasible. And CARB continues to push EPA to adopt more stringent locomotive standards and address locomotives after they're remanufactured. For OGVs, we think there are opportunities for lower standards and cleaner fuels. And for aviation, we see that there are opportunities for reductions from this sector. While these measures are going to be considered as black box measures, as they're written in the CARB strategy, they clearly identify how the path and the opportunities that EPA can take and the timing to get these reductions in the timely manner. Next slide. So one of the things is that the CARB statewide strategy is mainly a NOx-focused control strategy with co-benefits of VOC. In total, CARB's commitment is over 89 tons per day of ROG and almost 14 tons per day of VOCs. Of that, 51 tons per day are going to be assigned to the federal government for them to do their part. So in addition to this CARB commitment, CARB's existing control program provides approximately 167 tons per day of reductions from our implementation of our ongoing program. So out of that 51 tons that we've assigned to the federal sources, probably the largest and most important aspects will be reductions from ocean-going vessels and aircraft. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, CARB board adopted the 2022 state SIP strategy measures on September 22nd, 2022. The aggregate commitment that I touched on today will be adopted in conjunction with the South Coast AQMP at our January 2023 hearing. Once the CARB board has adopted the commitment and they adopted the AQMP, we will be transmitting it to EPA. Next, we will be working effectively on adopting the regulations and maximizing the emission reductions that we can receive. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thanks so much, Sylvia. I appreciate that. Again, another high-level overview of a very, for us air quality folks, very compelling and interesting document. A lot of really good information in there. So again, encourage anybody to go dive in on that. We're going to keep going with the presentations we have lined up for today. So you've heard a lot about control measures, both from AQMD, South Coast AQMD, as well as from CARB. There are potential environmental impacts associated with any sort of action like this. And so we have a presentation here on the California Environmental Quality Act, environmental assessment that's been done, or EIR. And so I have, see here, Kevin Nees lined up. So why don't you go ahead and take on this next presentation?
Sounds good. Thank you, Ian. Right. So I'm Kevin Nee. I'm a CEQA Air Quality Specialist at South Coast AQMD, and I'll be giving a brief overview of the draft Program Environmental Impact Report prepared for the 2022 AQMP. Next slide, please. So the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, was adopted as law in 1970. It is primarily an information disclosure document, both for decision makers and the public, to lay out potential significant environmental impacts and list feasible mitigation measures and alternatives for a proposed project. Next slide, please. So the 2022 AQMP is subject to CEQA, and because it encompasses the actions that the South Coast AQMD will undertake in the next 4 years, it is evaluated under a program EIR, meaning that it's an overarching analysis, and the rules, regulations, plans, and other projects will be individually further analyzed in the future and will tier off this document. Next slide, please. So we previously finished the notice of preparation of an initial study, NOPIS phase, and this is in the dark blue arrow and box to the left. Right now, we're in between the gold arrow and the light blue one, and South Coast AQMD has released its draft program EIR. And this document includes a more in-depth analysis of the environmental topics determined in the NOPIS to be potentially significant. And we also included a response to all comments received on the NOPIS. Once the public comment period for the draft program EIR is concluded on November 1st, we will work on the final program EIR, making sure to address any and all comments received on the draft program, as well as to show any updates to the analysis. Finally, in the white, our governing board will then consider certifying the final program EIR. Next slide. So our draft program EIR follows the traditional structure with a short and sweet executive summary, chapter 1, followed by full-length discussions in chapters 2 through 5. So for those who want an in-depth analysis, for instance, on air, I would direct you to read first the short and sweet chapter 1 and then jump to chapter 4, specifically the subchapter on air quality. Next slide, please. So as mentioned previously, the draft program EIR goes more in depth into particular environmental topic areas that were previously analyzed in the NOPIS and determined to be potentially significant. These are listed in the bottom left in the white and blue box, and they cover the topics of air quality and greenhouse gases, energy, hazards and hazardous materials, hydrology and water quality, noise, and solid and hazardous waste. The draft program EIR also includes 4 alternatives that were analyzed, including the no project alternative. Next slide, please. So overall, we expect long-term air quality and greenhouse gas benefits through NOx and GHG reductions. On the path to get there, however, we do expect air quality impacts from construction of new control devices, more efficient technology and infrastructure, short-term GHGs from producing electricity and alternative fuels, energy impacts due to increased electricity, natural gas, and hydrogen demand, and so on, going all the way down to solid and hazardous waste impacts relating to landfill capacity. And so for all the potentially significant impact areas, we also, where feasible, identified mitigation measures. But out of an abundance of caution, we did conclude that significant impacts would remain. Next slide, please. So the draft program EIR was released for a 46-day public review and public comment period on September 16, 2022. It will end close of business on November 1st, 2022. If you would like to access the draft program EIR, it's available online at the link shown on this slide, as well as if you would prefer a hard copy, you can contact our South Coast AQMD headquarters, and then we'll arrange for you to get a copy of that. Next slide, please. And so similar to the NOPIS going to the draft program EIR, as we prepare the final program EIR, I will be compiling all feedback, comments that we receive on the CEQA document. And so on this slide is listed my email as well as a fax number in case you want to send anything. Next slide, please. And so I'm part of the CEQA team underneath Mike Krause, as well as Barbara Radlin, my supervisor, and our contact information is here. If you have any questions, feel free to contact us as well. Thank you very much.
Okay, excellent. Thanks so much, Kevin. Really appreciate all that. In a similar way that there is just a presentation you heard on analyzing the air quality management plan and the potential environmental impacts from the measures in there, there's another way to analyze that, and that's looking at the socioeconomic impacts, and that's including both the health benefit side of it as well as the potential economic impacts from that. And so we have Dr. Elaine Shen here to talk about the socioeconomic report. Go ahead and take it away, Elaine.
All right, thank you, Ian. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Elaine Shen. I'm Planning and Rules Manager, overseeing the preparation of our socioeconomic report for the 2022 Air Quality Management Plan, or AQMP. Next slide, please. And by way of background, we prepare a socioeconomic impact assessment for our AQMP effort every time when there's a round of AQMP. So we have done that for more than 3 decades, since 1991. And even though this assessment is not legally required, unlike the socioeconomic impact assessment for our rulemaking effort, we still prepare this socioeconomic report in order to provide useful information for the members of our public, our stakeholders, as well as our governing board members. And what's in the report is that we provide a high-level executive summary where we present all the key findings of our different analysis. And in the ensuing chapters, then we take a deeper dive into different topic areas and to show our analysis and also the analysis results. And at the end, we also provide technical appendices for the readers who would like to get more technical details about our analysis. Next slide, please. So we released our draft socioeconomic report on October 1st. And in this report, we analyze the health benefits, the associated costs of implementing control measures, as well as the job and other macroeconomic impacts, as well as environmental justice impacts of implementing the revised draft 2022 AQMP control measures. And so this document is currently open for public comments, and the comment period will be ending on November 2nd. So we do encourage everybody who would like to comment or provide suggestions on this report to submit your comments and suggestions as early as possible. And all the documents that are available on this hyperlink here are listed on this slide. And when you click into the hyperlink, that will take you to a web page. And so on top of the web page, you will see what's in the little rectangular box. So there's a link that will take you to our main report, another link to our technical appendices. And at the bottom, underneath the 2 links, you will also find a link that would take you to the page where you can submit your public comments. And if you would like to submit your public comments separately as a PDF file, for example, you are more than welcome to submit that directly, also via email to our socioecon@aqmd.gov email address. Next slide, please. And so during the development of our draft socioeconomic report, we have engaged and also involved our stakeholders via our public processes. And since November last year until this month, we have conducted 4 different scientific, technical, and modeling peer review advisory group meetings. And so during these 4 meetings, we cover different topics related to our socioeconomic analysis. And back in May, we also had 3 scoping sessions that were given at our regional public workshops. So currently in this month, we're conducting 5 different regional public hearings, and this is the 4th public hearing that we're having this month. And also worth mentioning is that on October 7th, after we released the draft socioeconomic report, we also provided a presentation to our South Coast AQMD governing board in order to provide that additional information for their consideration. Next slide, please. So from this slide onwards, I will be presenting the key findings of our socioeconomic analysis. In terms of the incremental cost of implementing the 2022 AQMP control measures, so we estimated that on an annual average, we would be looking at $2.85 billion of incremental costs per year. And close to 57% of this annual cost, they are associated with the mobile source control measures that are included in the 2022 AQMP, with the remaining portion being attributable to the stationary and also area source control measures. And among the total of $2.85 billion per year, about 10% of this estimated cost are associated with incentive-based measures, where we assume that those incentive funding will be provided by the government sectors at different government levels. And so these incentives will be used, are expected to be used to help the regulated entities that include the business, consumers, households, to offset some of the incremental costs that we are estimating here. And further incentives beyond what we estimated might become available in the future with different strategy and also the programs that are being pursued at different levels of governments, including the state and federal government as well. Next slide, please. And on this slide, I want to provide you with a more detailed breakdown of the control measure costs. And on the left-hand side, on this pie chart, you can see that about 50% of the $2.85 billion in the annual cost that we estimated, they are associated with the mobile source control measures that are proposed by CARB to be implemented by CARB directly, or the mobile source controls that are proposed as part of the actions that would be implemented by the federal government. And on the right-hand side, you also can see that associated with these mobile source control measures, even though the cost accounts for about 50%, the NOx emission reductions that we're projecting for year 2037, they will account for about 75% of the total emission reductions in order for our region to reach air quality attainment. And so on the flip side of things is that you can see for the different stationary source and also area source control measures, they are relatively more expensive and resulting in relatively less emission reductions. And the reason why we're seeing this a little bit of misalignment here is because quite a lot of those stationary source control measures, they're already very tightly controlled. And in order for those sources to further reduce emissions, as our AQMP has to pursue all feasible control measures in order to bring our region into federal air quality attainment. In order to get those additional emission reductions, we are looking at deploying zero emission technologies wherever feasible and possible. And given that these sources usually have very high energy demand, and especially among those industrial sources. And in order to get those sources to deploy zero emission technologies, those technologies as of today, they are just generally more expensive than the conventional combustion-based technologies. And this is why you are seeing a relatively large share of costs being attributed to those stationary source and also area source control measures. Next slide, please. And in terms of the public health benefits that are associated with the implementation of our 2022 AQMP, and compared to that $2.85 billion of annual costs that we estimated, we also estimated close to $20 billion of annual monetized public health benefits that could be potentially realized by implementing these control measures. And the majority of those annualized health benefits that are associated with the reduced long-term exposure to both PM2.5 and ozone pollution. But then there's also a portion of that that are related to benefits that can be realized by avoided asthma attacks, onset of asthma, different cardiovascular diseases, and also as well as avoided work loss days or school loss days because of different triggers or discomforts that's being caused by air pollution. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to take a deeper dive into the avoided premature deaths. And so on this slide here, on the left-hand side, you will see two maps that are showing the spatial distribution of the projected health benefits in terms of the number of cases of avoided premature deaths throughout our 4-county region. And so they are being demonstrated as associated with ozone exposure and as associated with PM2.5 exposure, respectively. And on the right-hand side on this table, you will see the projected numbers of premature deaths that will occur in different regions, in the different counties within our region. So by year 2037, we're expecting that we could avoid about 3,000 cases of premature deaths as a result of implementing our 2022 AQMP. And how the spatial distribution, how the benefits are being distributed across our region has three underlying key factors. So it's associated with where we project the improvement of air quality will be, but it also has a lot to do with the size of population across our region. And so where there are more people living in the area, then we're expecting that more people will be benefiting from those health benefits. And that's why size of population is a key factor. Importantly, it also has a lot to do with where we expect the vulnerable and susceptible population will be located as well. Next slide, please. And in order to ensure that the health benefits are being equitably distributed among EJ and non-EJ communities, we also conducted our EJ environmental justice analysis on different health effects. And so on this slide, I'm going to give you the example of avoided premature deaths. In order to do this analysis, we need to begin by defining what exactly we mean as EJ, environmental justice communities. And the main definition that we're deploying for this analysis is consistent with the Senate Bill 535 definition of disadvantaged communities. But in the meantime, in order to tailor the analysis and do sensitivity tests of different definitions that would be giving more weight to air quality associated indicators, we also look at definition 1 and definition 2 to see if our conclusion or findings will change. And as you can see on this table, it really doesn't matter which definition we use. Then we can see that the health benefits actually are projected to accrue more for the EJ communities when compared to the non-EJ communities. Next slide, please. In this report, we also conduct our macroeconomic impact analysis with a focus on job impacts. And we do this projection or simulation of the possible effects that are associated with incremental costs that are the blue bars that are being shown on this slide. And we also look at the potential job impacts that could be associated with the health benefits that we projected. And on the purple dashed line here, it's the net impact when we put both costs and benefits into our job impact simulation. And so overall, we're projecting an annual average of about 17,000 jobs foregone, and in our economy that has more than 10 million jobs. And even though this is going to be, we project that this is going to slow down our future projected annualized job growth rate, but then still overall, our job growth is going to continue to be on a positive trajectory between year 2023 and year 2037. Next slide, please. And as for next steps for our AQMP socioeconomic report, as I mentioned earlier, we released the report on October 1st, and we're currently conducting our regional public hearings in this month of October. And our public comment period for the document, the draft socioeconomic report, is going to end on November 2nd. And again, we would like to encourage everybody to submit your comments and suggestions to us. And in mid-November, we expect to release our draft final socioeconomic report, where we will take into account all your comments and suggestions. And this version of the socioeconomic report will also include a section where we include our staff responses to all of your comments. And on December 2nd, together with the entire 2022 AQMP package, we'll bring the package to our South Coast AQMD board for their consideration at the public hearing. Next slide, please. So if you have any questions or comments on our draft socioeconomic report, please feel free to reach out to Brian Velocic, who is on my staff in the socioeconomic analysis unit, or reach out to myself directly. And if you have any general questions, not exactly related to socioeconomic analysis per se, please feel free to reach out to Dr. Sammy Lee, who presented earlier, or to Ian McMillan, who is our Assistant Deputy Executive Officer for our Planning Division. And at the bottom of this slide, you can find a hyperlink to our socioeconomic analysis webpage, where you can find the links to our draft report appendices and also the link to the public comment submission form, or just email us at socioecon@aqmd.gov. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Elaine. So we've gone through a lot of content so far today, a lot of presentations, a lot of material and analysis that has been put forward. Now we get to the really important part of this meeting, which is hearing from you all. And so we want to open this up now for public comment and to hear if anybody has any thoughts that they would like to share on either the AQMP, the CARB SIP strategy, the environmental analysis, or the socioeconomic analysis. So we want to offer that opportunity now. If you wanted to make public comment, you can hit the raise hand button at the bottom of your screen there in Zoom, and then we will call on people to go ahead and provide those comments to us. So with that, I see a couple hands have already been raised. I'm going to go ahead and call on the first hand that I saw that went up, and this is from Mark Abramowitz. Go ahead with your comment.
Thanks very much, Ian. And once again, I'm taking the time to just add on to previous comments and cover some different topics. I know earlier I hadn't had an opportunity to have the time to talk about some of the CARB sections. So I'm just going to make one comment about CARB. Just something I don't understand about the public process is that why there wasn't better integration with the AQMP development process, and how with the board, the CARB board having adopted their strategy, how that's not premature to the rest of this process going on and public comments being taken here. Next, I'd like to get into the question of, once again, implementation and execution. And question of parity. And there are a couple of areas where the AQMP doesn't seem to be providing adequate parity, and that's with respect to any commitments or responsibilities on the part of government agencies. And they have land use planning requirements and authorities, and I'm just trying to understand why there are not more measures that actually impact them. I also want to make note of the fact that there are barriers that district staff has indicated that prevent certain things from happening. And I look at the recent legislative proposals by South Coast to their board, and unfortunately, none of them cover some of the various barriers that the district has in terms of challenges that the district thinks it has with respect to Bacter layer, or some of the burdens that are imposed upon the district that make no sense from an air quality perspective that are in section 40440 of the Health and Safety Code. Some of those sections are fairly anti-air quality and provide huge burdens on staff. And I'm just wondering why the district doesn't focus more on things in its legislative proposals that would eliminate those barriers. Again, these are things within the control of the state of California and even within the control of the district to actually put in some measures that it will consider taking further steps, or it will commit to taking further steps to eliminate some of these barriers. Thanks again, and I appreciate the opportunity to comment.
All right, Mark, thank you very much for commenting. Appreciate that. We are going to go to the next hand I see raised. And again, if anybody wants to make public comment, feel free to click the raise hand button. So I see James Enstrom, your hand is raised. Did you have a comment you'd like to make?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
I have commented before, and I'm going to continue commenting until I believe the air quality management plans reflect the full body of evidence that exists regarding the actual health effects of air pollution in the South Coast Air Basin. In particular, there's a major point that there are no premature deaths in California due to PM 2.5 or ozone. This is in a body of literature. I published a major paper in 2017 on this. Also another study in 2018. There is a special reason for this. No matter what the evidence is nationwide or internationally, the death rates in California are so low that there is no relationship. And this must be corrected. I have submitted evidence now to 4 consecutive plans, the 2007 plan, the 2012 plan, the 2016 plan, and now the 2022 plan. None of my evidence is cited directly in the reports. It's only because of public comments that I've submitted, and then basically my public comments are dismissed. I really need to, so I resubmitted comments that I submitted for the 2016 plan yesterday. These were directed at the Health Effects Officer, Joe K. Ghosh, who is no longer there. I really need an opportunity to discuss this evidence with a trained epidemiologist who's willing to fairly assess all the available evidence, particularly the evidence here in the state of California and in the South Coast Air Basin. The death rates in the South Coast Air Basin are extremely low compared to other places in the United States, and this has a bearing on the cost-benefit ratio. In addition, and I've made this point a number of times too, the entire plan should be based on personal exposure to these air pollutants, not ambient monitors. I know that ambient air pollution is the way the NACs are set up, but that's not a realistic assessment of what people are actually experiencing. The levels of exposure, and there's much data on this, for both ozone and PM 2.5 are well below the NACs. And I think, again, you must fairly assess the economic risk benefit here and slow this process down until I can have a fair chance to talk with and resolve this.
Okay, thank you for your comments. As you indicated, you did submit a written comment letter to us, which we appreciate. We have been receiving written comments on the AQMP, and we will provide response to comments to those, as there are many opinions that we do hear as we go through this process. I do definitely appreciate you sharing that with us. I do want to keep opening this up to any other commenters who might have comments that they would like to make. Please, again, you can raise your hand at the bottom of the screen. If you would like to make any comment, or there was also a lot of contact information I think you saw throughout these presentations. If you had specific items that you wanted to discuss, feel free to reach out to any of those contacts that were provided as well. But I'm just going to kind of keep stretching this out here to see if anybody wants to make comment. Please go ahead, raise your hand. Now is a good opportunity. We are going to have one more regional public hearing tomorrow. And that's also at 1 o'clock. Today's primary focus was for Orange County. So if there were questions specific to Orange County, now's a good time. Tomorrow's regional public hearing will be focused more for Riverside County. All of these regional hearings are recorded and placed onto our website on the webcasts page. So if anybody wanted to go back and hear previous presentations, which are very similar to what was today, or previous comments, you can fast forward to that portion if you wanted to. So I want to again give another opportunity. If anybody wants to raise their hand, I see one more person raise their hand. So I see Teresa Bui, you have your hand raised. Did you have a comment?
Thank you so much. Good afternoon. My name is Teresa Bui with Pacific Environment. We're an environmental nonprofit group based in San Francisco with a consultative status with the International Maritime Organization. Really appreciative of all the work that staff has done on this plan. Our main comments are on the shipping part. I know that AQMD has listed that it is up to the federal responsibility, but AQMD does have a strong authority to also help regulate ships. And so what we're urging you to do is set strong emission targets for the commercial marine ports that will help get us in alignment with the 1.5 degrees C. And we did submit a comment letter yesterday, but again, we're asking the South Coast AQMD to set strong emission targets for the commercial marine ports and work with CARB in support of setting a zero emission by 2040 standard for all vessel categories, and an interim to make sure that we're protecting the port community, setting some short-term clear mandates that would allow only Tier 3 vessels to visit San Pedro ports by 2025. These are the things that we think will help to reduce the NOx emission and help to save lives. And right now there's record funding available for ports to help to combat or to transition to zero emission with $1.2 billion under the Port and Freight Infrastructure Program under CalSTA, of which 70% is dedicated to San Pedro ports. And then at the federal level, there's $3 billion from US EPA to reduce air pollution at ports. And that will help that includes shore power requirements and cleaning up pollution from ports. So thank you so much for all your work on this.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Teresa. Appreciate that and the written comments as well. Again, I'll open this up in case there are any other comments. Please feel free to raise your hand and we can go ahead and hear your comment. Give it just a little bit more here in case anybody else thinks of something. And not seeing any hands being raised. So with that, I think we'll go ahead and conclude this meeting. I want to thank staff for all the hard work to prepare the presentations and give them and put on this meeting today. A lot of effort went into that. Definitely want to thank all of those in the audience who attended and are providing feedback and looking through this and thinking about how this air quality management plan can affect them. And so look forward to continuing this conversation in other forums. But for now, wish you all a good afternoon and until next time, I suppose. Thank you, everybody.